Welcome back, Lindsay.
It's great to be back, Monique. Thanks for having me.
What a pleasure. I wanted you back after I put out the first episode, and it was received, the first episode that we did together, and it was received by so many people are in this situation, whether it is a parent that they have or a caregiver that is emotionally immature and they're in relationship with them, or any kind of close relationship. So I thought that just for those of you who haven't heard the first episode that I did with Lindsay, it's great. I asked her so many questions and it was really a great episode. I think the first thing we should do is really define when we say emotionally immature, what does that mean?
Yeah. Well, emotional maturity, just think about it in terms of child development. We start out immature, of course, and hopefully we develop to a point where we're mature. Emotional immaturity is a sort of like a line of development. We can have our emotional development, but we can also have our intellectual development, our social development, our skills development, and all these threads, they're not independent of each other, but they really are distinct in terms of what is being matured or developed. So one of the things that is important to pay attention to here is that you can have a person whose social development or their skill development or their intellectual development has proceeded just fine. I mean, they can be highly intelligent, they're very popular people, they can be very effective in their jobs, very, very skilled. But in their intimate relationships and in their ability to modulate and regulate their own inner balance, think about it in terms of tolerance for stress, or think about it in terms of their ability to not get super emotionally reactive to events. In those areas, relationships and emotional management, they will show the immaturities. Okay. So a lot of times people will say, well, my parent, my boss, my whoever, they can't be emotionally immature because they're so successful, or my dad's a professor, or my mother is the most popular mom on the block. As if that means that they're mature emotionally, but it doesn't. You can have all kinds of skills and good development in other areas and still show emotional immaturity in those particular areas. So we want to understand too that there is a kind of a continuum of emotional immaturity to emotional maturity. And this is a moving target. It's not all the way from one extreme to the other, but we tend to settle into a range of emotional maturity as we grow up. It's kind of where we got to in our development. So you can have a person who maybe, their development was unimpeded. They had adequate resources. They weren't, mistreated or abused, and they grew up to be pretty emotionally mature, capable of good relationships, capable of handling stress, that kind of thing. So you can have a person who is toward the mature end of things, and then you can have another person who maybe didn't get so far because of trauma, because of neglect, or because of lack of opportunities, whatever it was that would have a kind of a limiting effect on their development. Those people may show more signs of emotional immaturity. Now, I do want to mention that I've got so much to say about this.
We could be here for hours.
Well, I'll try not to do that to you, but but I did want to mention, because I think this is important, is that we have all noticed, if you're at all self-aware, that if you are sick, exhausted, stressed, your emotional maturity, even if basically your range is, pretty highly emotionally mature, you can regress back to more emotionally immature behaviors and attitudes and reactions, because we all have that inner child inside ourselves, like the Russian nesting dolls, that holds the capacity to be that little child again. So we can move according to how things are going in our lives. We might slide back down that developmental, range to show more emotionally immature behavior, which of course is very embarrassing after it's over, but hey, it happens. Or you can be an emotionally immature person who has their fine moments, who rises above their defensiveness and their reactivity, who has a moment of insight, compassion, all these positive qualities, because they, for the moment, have sort of transcended their own fears. Or maybe they're particularly resourced, meaning things are going their way. They've got a new boyfriend, they got a new job, they got a raise, and it buoys them up. And then they can be more big-hearted and understanding toward other people. And temporarily, their functioning will improve to the point of showing more emotional maturity. This is a word to the wise for anyone who dates someone who's like in a successful part of their lives, because that person can stretch into appearing more emotionally mature than they're really going to be when the stress hits or when the frustrations mount up. It's one of the best recommendations I know of why we should date people for a long time. To let them go back into their comfortable range.
Yes.
You can see
Share some stress together. Share some stress and watch. The reason I really want to talk about this is because I, for myself, didn't have the language and the understanding that you put forth that made it really understandable, and it made sense, and it provided context. And when I didn't understand, I found myself in a position of feeling like I really didn't have any choice in it. This is just how it is. And I think I paid a price. I paid a price physically, because we often say psychologically, and it impacts us. It really impacts the whole person in the long run. When we can understand like what the immature parent is actually, for the most part, capable of, what's going on there, we have the information and we can decide what we want to do with it, and maybe not have as much false hopes. I just think it's important to build up the strength of the person who is in this relationship. As you know, it can be so draining, so difficult. When you say that they don't have the full capacity, can we go into a little bit more detail? So what does that look like? Does that mean that if you're hurt or you're feeling sad and you look to them, how would that translate in a relationship? I want to give some concrete examples.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, let's think about it in terms of some of like the basic characteristics of emotional immaturity, and then we'll kind of see how they play out in those specific examples that you're talking about. So, I mean, number one, the biggest one, and of course everybody knows this if they've been involved with someone like this, is egocentrism. Emotionally immature people, just like 4-year-olds, I mean, who can blame a human being for wanting to be number one and be the center of attention? That's the way we are. And we all have that little, that baby nesting doll inside us that, is the perennial child. But hopefully we, we proceed to mature into these different selves as we get older, so that can be managed and contained, and we can live happily with other people and have good relationships. But for the emotionally immature person, that egocentrism means all roads lead to them. They are their own primary concern. How things affect them is what they're interested in. They can't help but think about how something is going to affect them first. And we all do that. I mean, my goodness, we're all self-interested. Theirs is at the expense of empathy, often, for other people. Human beings are basically kind of self-centered down there in their core inner child self. But if you have developed empathy for other people, if you have an imaginative capacity to see how other people might be feeling about something and take that into account, that is a developed skill. And once you have empathy, you're able to have good relationships because it becomes automatic. You just don't do things without thinking about how it's going to affect the other person. It becomes part and parcel of your coping with the world. But with emotionally immature people, just like with 3 and 4-year-olds, it's me, 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 me. And they don't have that capacity to conceptualize that other people have this inner subjective experience, this inner world that's different from them and must be taken into account. They just don't see that.
Okay.
So an example would be a woman goes to her parent with a relationship problem. Maybe she's even considering divorce or whatever. And before she's said, 5 or 6 sentences, the mother's jumping in with, yeah, that reminds me about what happened with Dad.
I'm sorry to laugh. So exactly relatable.
Or you're at a cocktail party or a party and someone asks you, what you do or what you're interested in and whatever, and you start to tell them, and before you can finish your thought, they're having an association to what you said that pertains to them. They're not having the experience of what is it like to be in a conversation with me. They just had a thought. So they're just quote unquote being themselves. They're just saying what they think. Okay. But those two things, the egocentrism and the poor empathy, are ruinous to a long-term, emotionally intimate relationship, because it just isn't sustainable if you don't think about the other person once in a while. They also tend to be very unreflective. They're not reflecting on their behavior. They're not self-reflective. If there's a problem in a relationship, for instance, let's say that I don't know, maybe there's a sister, an adult sister and an adult brother. Maybe the brother does or says something the sister doesn't like, the sister doesn't speak to him. If the brother is emotionally immature, he's never going to say to himself, gee, I wonder if there's something that I did that could have caused this estrangement. I wonder if I need to go back and really think about what I said. No, that's not happening, because emotionally immature people, like very small children, are always externalizing blame. If there's fault to be found, it's outside of them. So that also doesn't allow for repair in relationships. There's no amends being made. There's no apology being made. And so when things go wrong, as they inevitably do, because we're human beings, there isn't a mechanism in place whereby they can reflect on their behavior and go back to the person and work it out in some way through apology or amends. Also, one of the things that I want to kind of stress with this is that the emotionally immature person's view of reality is very self-absorbed. They have a kind of a optional relationship to reality. If they don't like the reality, it didn't really happen. They deny, they distort, they dismiss reality. So let's say that that daughter in the initial example that I gave, she goes back to her mom and she says, Mom, I was trying to tell you about my relationship with Bob, and you jumped in and started talking about Dad again. And you always do that. And I feel like I can't come to you with my problems because it always turns out to be about you. And the mother says, I didn't do that. I love you. Of course I want to know what's happening with you. Okay, that's crazy making.
Totally.
Yeah, but from the mother's point of view, that very primitive self-defense of denial says, If it scares me, if it makes me feel bad about myself, it just didn't happen. Because emotionally immature people are guided by their emotions and their reactions in the moment. It's really pretty no holds barred. If something makes me feel bad, I didn't do it, it didn't happen, you're crazy, you're mistaken. And the way that they allow their feelings to determine the reality of a situation, like the mother might come back to that daughter and say, "So you're just saying I'm the worst mother ever. I guess you don't love me anymore." Not at all what the daughter was saying. The daughter was trying to work out an interpersonal problem with the mother by being honest with her and emotionally intimate about the experience she had of being shut down. The mother comes back with what it feels like to her. "I felt unloved when you criticized me, so you must not love me." And so they create their own reality, which is very hard on people who are trying to really communicate with them.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking it because it's their reality and like you described, that's all they see. The difficult part for being on the other side is you're constantly bumping against a wall. I want to talk about, as I've heard you is say, this question of we have this hope that they will have self-reflection somehow. I'm sort of comfortable with the not comfortable with it. I don't like it, but the notion that kind of like a 2, 3-year-old, this is where they're at. Like, unless something, they have this incredible experience of suddenly they're enlightened and they get that, then I don't see it happening because it is not there. So it's like me, I don't have an arm, but I'm like making an arm. You got to have an arm. The arm is not there. And I'm
Right.
still expecting the arm. That's a hard thing to do and a hard thing to get through because we are emotional connectors. We were designed to connect. And then it's like, I can't, I'm trying, but it's a wall. You don't see me, you don't hear me.
Right.
Very frustrating.
Yes.
So let's talk about that for a second, that the capacity to change. I think that's important because a lot of people will keep hanging on, thinking that they're going to get it one day. They will see the light. They'll finally hear me. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I call that in my books the healing fantasy. Okay, that I have as the child of an emotionally immature parent, I would have the fantasy that one day, yeah, they would hear me, they would see me. Um, and I'm very sympathetic to this as a therapist. Sort of back in the old days before I really understood this dynamic, I would get frustrated with clients who seemed to jump back into the fire, or they would give their parent, the 20th chance to disappoint them, almost as if, they didn't experience it the first 19 times. And so I used to feel kind of frustrated about that, but I don't anymore because now I understand two things. One is that hope is imperative for human beings. Okay, like the worst thing is to feel hopeless or to feel like things aren't going to ever change, ever change. That is a terrible feeling. We are not designed for that. And it kills the spirit. It's very bad for us physically. Okay, so if you want to hope that your parents are going to change, I'm not going to be the one who pretends to know that that can't happen, number one, because I'm not sure that I'm completely right in my assessment of this person that I've never met. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they do have a potential. But when my client is coming to me and telling me the evidence that the person is not interested in change, and because they're not interested in communicating or talking about it or getting any kind of feedback that would, allow for change, when that's happening, I want to keep in mind that this person may need that hope. Now, I'm going to work with them on how to deal with the person so that they don't get as hurt or as overpowered by that person. But I'm not going to make it my primary goal that they don't hold on to this hope,
Mhm.
because they're holding on to it because they haven't put the things in place yet for themselves that would allow them to back off of that hope for this relationship. The other thing is that emotionally immature people, as I said earlier, have their moments. We're all like a collection of parts. We all have, at least this is what I believe, we all have kind of like a little kernel in there that's our true self. The emotionally immature person usually guards that and doesn't show that. They don't feel safe showing that innermost self to the world or even to their closest people. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that they understand that those glimpses of the true self, those moments of connection, are maybe not something that can be counted on. Like maybe, yes, maybe you did catch a glimpse of it. Maybe sometimes they can lower their defenses and see you or hear you. Yes. But if 99% of the time that's not happening, then I think we have to find ways of dealing with the 99%, even though we say, yes, the 1% was real. You're not crazy. That parent did show empathy for you. They were sensitive to you that time. It's just a question of, can they keep it up? Can they sustain it? Is it something that you can count on in the relationship? And if it's an emotionally immature person, it's going to be probably not. So people grow out of their healing fantasies as they connect more and more with themselves and derive their security from their relationship with their own self-connection. We can't hurry that process along, by making them give up the healing fantasy. But we can point out what they have told us about the situation as the way of encouraging them to take care of themselves. Yeah, but we don't have to, that's not something that we have to take away from people, but we have to keep recontextualizing it in the big picture of how that person treats them and whether or not it's good or bad for them. Because some of these relationships are so, if I may use the word, toxic, that people's physical health is affected. I mean, I've been very worried about some of my clients in their contact with these people because it's just brutal in terms of what happens to them psychologically, and then how that begins to manifest physically.
Yeah, in your biology, absolutely. And I know for me that was my experience, especially as I got older, because I didn't know that there was choices and I didn't understand everything that was happening. And I just was accepting everything and didn't think I had choices. But then after an interaction, especially one that was really unhealthy, I'd be on the couch for 5 days.
Yeah.
And my husband's like, this is not healthy. This is not good. I'm like, I know. But that's it. I think our bodies are speaking what our words and our heart can't. It's like, I'm tired. I've had enough. This is too much. This is overwhelming.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, we talked about parents and how, challenging that is. And I love how you spoke about hope and that we don't want to take it away, but we also want to be realistic, with that. I also think that for people who have been brought up in these kinds of closest relationships, family, this is like a fish in water. So when they go out, what feels familiar is going to often be these kinds of interactions where they didn't ask about me. It was all about them. Okay, that's familiar. And they may find themselves in those kinds of relationships. So I'd love to hear what you have found.
Yeah, that is often what happens because we become skilled in those areas that we need to be skilled in when we're growing up. So if in order to get along with people who are emotionally immature, you may have to put their needs first. You may have to always be thinking twice about how what you think or what you feel is going to affect them. So you end up monitoring other people's responses before you even touch base with yourself. Because for the emotionally immature person, they expect you to do two things. One is to help them maintain their emotional stability, help them calm down, help them feel better. They're always looking, just like the little child looks to the parent to make them feel better. They need your help in feeling emotionally settled, stable.
Okay.
They also need your help in feeling good self-esteem, because emotionally immature people usually have a very poor sense of self. They have roles. They kind of know who they are in terms of maybe, the work that they do or who they are in the family or that kind of thing. But when it comes to that inner sense of, I am really my own person. I really exist. I'm an individual. Yeah, that doesn't get well developed in them.
Mm.
So their self-esteem is always on a kind of a slippery footing, because they don't have this sense of self inside that they can return to, no matter what anybody else is saying about them. There's not a place that they can return to in themselves to recenter and to feel good about themselves again. They can't do that on their own. So they often rely on the most pliable and vulnerable people in their orbit to help them feel better about themselves, to bolster their self-esteem. So oftentimes their kids get kind of parentified, and they end up functioning as a kind of a surrogate parent to the parent. Let's broaden it a little bit. It could be to a spouse, to a partner. Help my spouse or partner stay calm and feel good about themselves. Broaden it to your boss. I function as a kind of a supporter to my boss. I help him to calm down. I bolster his self-esteem. I raise his confidence before meetings. I tell him it's not his fault when he's upset about something. Child of an emotionally immature parent learns how to take care of other people's feelings and take responsibility for their feelings. So they always feel accountable for what somebody else is experiencing. Turn themselves, you really resonate. I know I am too.
Yeah.
Turn themselves inside out, trying to, suss out what that other person needs from them, and they give it to them. Now, once they give it to them, that's a good feeling, because people, especially if you're halfway emotionally mature, have this thing called altruism, which is that we actually feel good when we do good. Okay. There's a book called Born Good, which has this idea in it, which I just love, which is that, altruism is not some kind of byproduct of, a more basic egocentrism. It's part of being human. So when you are actually able to help an emotionally immature person function better, you notice that, you did good. It's very rewarding. That can, you can get conditioned into looking for those kinds of those moments of effectiveness like that feel so good. That's where people pleasing comes from.
Wow.
Yeah, people pleasing is just doing what you've been trained to do. It's constructing the relationship on the rules that you learned, which is that other person is basically more important than you are.
And it is also a survival strategy. When that person is calmer, then I know I'll be okay.
Yes, good point.
I want to go in so many directions. So we hear that people who are emotionally immature, there was a trauma somewhere, they didn't get their needs met or something. What about those of us who are raised by emotionally immature parents, and we've got that self-reflection, we've got empathy, but we were raised by that? I'm not saying you have an answer, but isn't that interesting?
I think it's the most fascinating question.
Isn't it?
Yes, that it just is amazing to me how you get a kid who ends up being more emotionally mature than their parents, and lots of times than their siblings. Where does it come from? How does that happen?
Mm-hmm.
So the best that I've been able to figure out is that I think some kids come into the world, and there's some research to back this up, that babies are different in their level of sensitivity to um, environmental things, and also their perceptiveness. So you can have a baby who's born, and this tends to correlate, I think, with intelligence, but it doesn't mean that the more intelligent you are, the more sensitive or perceptive you are, but they do correlate.
Okay.
Okay. So, and we know that, some kids are born more sensitive than other kids. It just seems to be maybe some kind of innate neurological wiring thing. But let's say that you are more sensitive and more perceptive than the average bear, certainly maybe than your siblings. Well, you're going to notice and respond to those moments where your parents' true self or their kindness or their attention is turned toward you. You're going to pick up. It's like the person who, can pick out the grain of wheat, on the ground in a famine is going to survive better than the person who just sees the empty field. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you have that kind of perceptiveness, you may find more in that parent to work with and to get your needs met than a kid who's not as sensitive or not as perceptive. That's one way of thinking about it. And the sensitive, perceptive child tends to go out in the world, noticing other people, okay, being more empathic because they're sensitive. And so they form better relationships outside the family. And that has like a positive spiral because teachers like those kids. Teachers reach out to those kids. They get support maybe that other kids don't. So you have all these different ways that kids can be, I think, within themselves different because they're bringing these different gifts to their family. Now, another idea, and this comes from a friend of mine, Tiffany Wentz Root. She's a therapist in Washington who's currently writing a book about this. But her idea is that she thinks that these these kids that function as kind of more emotionally mature than other kids in the family, it's because they've been assigned the role of parent caretaker from an early age, and that they have stepped in to help that parent out, or they've been the parent has kind of trusted them. Maybe the parent senses that they have more on the ball or something, and they kind of trust that kid to be an adjunct parent to help them out, to make them feel better, to be someone who will listen to them. So the child gets parentified, but the child also gets a big boost in their self-esteem because they really are helping that parent. I mean, they're really capable. And the more the parent turns to them and the more effective they are with that parent, now we're setting up this healthy maturation process. Okay. And they're getting more good feedback from the parent because they are being able to be more effective in helping the parent. Now, the tragedy of this, though, is that becomes the basis of their identity. Yeah.
For the rest of their life.
Rest of their lives. And then they can't let it alone. They have to help people. They have to step in as the caretaker. In that sense, it's a tragedy of choice in terms of their identity. But my goodness, I think that all those things, as much as they tend to hold people back in their own development, those things actually end up giving these kids a lot of strength. I mean, I see it when they come to me in therapy because they're insightful, they're concerned about other people, they're curious about themselves, they don't externalize blame, and make it everybody else's fault. Like, why is this stuff falling out of the sky on my head all the time? They're like, no, gosh, I wonder what I did. I wonder what I can do to make this better. They think about stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, they're really lovely to work with because they are interested in taking responsibility for their own growth.
And then they go into careers like social work and therapy. They become therapists and all of that. But yeah,
And also, I also just want to mention that those skills also translate nicely into other kinds of fields that we don't typically think of as caregiving, like managers, consultants, people who start and run businesses where you need a fair amount of people skills and sensitivity to others to start a business, retain your employees, all that. So, yeah, the the therapist connection is, I think it's definitely there, but I think there are a lot of other places where they end up being strengths, can be used.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. So, okay, we talked about now the thing that I find that I've seen with people who have had parents like that. The parent called, hello, hi. And then it's like not how are you? Or maybe they do have social etiquette in there, how are you? But then it's me. Okay, okay, bye. What I've seen is that often when they start to look at their friend list, who are the people around them? Often the friendships are much the same. There's non-reciprocity. I hope that people will get to taste, since they didn't get to taste it in their relationships with their caregivers, that they can see how really delicious, I think we used that word last time we were together, how beautiful a relationship that has reciprocity, where I see you, my eyes light up when I'm happy to be, I want to know how you're doing. And it's back and forth, and how wonderful a relationship like that can be.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's crucial. We want people to be able to feel. This is really key to therapy. We want people to be able to feel when they feel energized and good and look forward to being with that person. Okay. Your body will tell you who's good for you, and they'll tell you who's not good for you. Because if that person is emotionally immature and maybe they're using your sensitivity or your willingness to put them first, and they're acting in those kind of emotionally immature ways, can avoid that as long as you can feel inside like, this is boring, or I'm tired, or I wonder what I'm going to watch on TV tonight when I finally get home. It's a feeling of I'm being drained. But too often, people who grow up with emotionally immature parents are not encouraged to tune into their feelings.
Yes.
Be aware. Absolutely. I'll tell you what is the right thing to feel. I'll tell you what you think. Yeah, don't you dare think that, or don't you dare feel that. That's a bad feeling.
Sit down and listen to them. It doesn't matter that they're talking for an hour, not once asked you about your son. Sit down.
Exactly. Yeah, and so it's a very it's a really it's a really hard thing for them to realize that they can trust their own gut feeling about, am I having a good time or not? Am I having fun yet or not? That's the work of therapy, is that redoing the self-connection so that I know who brings me energy and who drains me, even if I've known them since grade school. Okay. And of course we don't just want one little inner circle of friends. We hopefully have, other larger circles that are maybe not as intimate, but are still supportive, or it's still nice to talk to someone that you grew up with, that kind of thing. But for the people that you really get your support and your emotional nurturance from, and that you really share things in an emotionally intimate way, yeah, you want that to be a person where it does feel reciprocal. I say in my very first book, Who You're Meant to Be, that the purpose of friendships is to build energy. And when that thought came to me, it was like, ooh, heresy.
I've never heard that before, but that is beautiful. Because energy, you know how I translate that? The purpose of the friendship is to feel alive together.
Yes.
That's what it feels like. Beautiful.
Yes, that's really good. Yeah, because we get to choose the friend, and we get to choose the person that we want to have certain kinds of feelings with. And, in my experience, people want more energy. And like you said, they want to feel alive when they're interacting with the person. They want to be able to be present emotionally and have that wonderful back and forth thing going on.
And honestly, I love that you're saying that because, our bodies do get cut off, especially if we've been raised in these kinds of families because we couldn't listen. We were directed towards their needs. So getting back in touch because the body is still speaking. So those questions you had, which relationships do I feel, alive, and which ones do I feel kind of like maybe a dread or did you use the word depleted? I don't know what you used, but
Yeah, drained, depleted.
Yeah, because our body is talking to us.
Bored.
Yes, exactly. And we don't have to bypass. We bypassed our whole childhood, adolescence. We don't have to bypass what our body is telling us because it's trying to take care of us.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just want to mention that, we're all so different in terms of what we can stand and what we can't. We are very different in what we can tolerate. Lots of times, emotionally immature people will do quite well putting up with other emotionally immature people because their defenses are so great at tuning other people out. So they have a sort of a self-protective moat around them where they don't let anybody get too close. And the emotionally immature person is likely to out-talk or over-talk that person in a way that they hold their own. Whereas the more internalizing, more emotionally mature person, may listen too politely actually and feel rude if they suddenly redirect the conversation.
This is so good. Tell us about your few books that you just wrote. And then I think you said you're also in the process of writing another one. Keep writing. We love it. Tell us what you have.
Yeah. Well, let's see. The most recent one is called the Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, a Guided Journal. And that is just what it sounds like. It's a journal that addresses the impacts that emotionally immature parents have on our lives and on our personalities. And so each chapter is devoted to a certain impact that they have had on us. And then the questions that I ask in there and the exercises that I give are really designed to help people get at changing that dynamic that they've been trained into. And I tried to make it as much like I'm talking to them as possible so that you get that feeling of it's safe to open up and write down these things in your journal to help yourself increase your self-knowledge and your confidence. So that's the most recent one. And it's in a really handy little, I love the size of it.
I love those things.
Very, very portable.
That's what I was going to say. Portable.
Yeah, take it in right.
And in your purse and that's great.
Exactly. And then before that, the other newest one, which came out in July of last year, is called Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People. And that is 50 little mini chapters. So these are good for if you just have 15 minutes or you don't want
good.
Yeah, you don't want heavy reading or long-term reading, but you do want something with substance. This is what's
You must be having fun, like coming up with, because there's so much, and coming up with little creative ideas.
It's been a joy. I've really had a good time doing it.
Well, we're so appreciative. for all that you've done and helping us understand what really we just didn't understand, and helping us feel a little bit more empowered because we have context. Hey, this makes sense. Oh, I thank you so much. And I thank you for being here. And I'll put your website, which will have your books and things on there. And
Oh, and I did want to mention too, Monique, that my website has probably changed since the last time that we spoke. So it's Lindsay Gibson, PSYD.com. That's the new address. And also, if people are interested in more social media stuff, I can be found on YouTube and also on TikTok and Instagram under Academy for Self-Help.
Instagram. Yay. I've been looking for you. So under Academy of Self-Help.
Of self-help.
Yay. Yeah, such great, great stuff. Whoever I've sent your work to have been changed in a good way. So great.
So glad. I'm so glad.
Thanks for being here.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me, Monique. It's been a total pleasure, as always.